afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Wilson. I'm the founder and CEO of Hyper 63
Hey, man.
LLC.
Hey, Gene. How's it going?
Today
Good?
we'll be talking about Hyper. We'll do a deep dive in Hyper, which is kind of a services framework platform, and
Testing.
do a short demo.
1, 2, 3.
And then talk about.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Wilson. I'm the founder and CEO.
So what
Hey,
we're
man.
doing with
Hey,
Hyper
Gene.
is
How's it going?
really
Today
focusing
we'll
around
be talking about Hyper.
unintentional technical debt. And that's a fancy way of saying that really what we want to do is really shave a lot of developers' time that is spent doing, technical debt management or just routine tasks, and give them an opportunity to focus on things that actually are more creative, more exciting, more focused on the project. So what we do is provide core building blocks that end up being services that allow you to connect to, but then Hyper takes care of all of the back-end security, reliability, resiliency, kind of things, and especially scalability. Scalability is probably one of the most important ones. So we have all kinds of services like data, storage, cache, queue, and search. So those are our core services. And instead of saying, well, I need XYZ database, you just connect to a data API. Or instead of saying I need XYZ cache, you just connect to a cache. So as a developer, if you're building using any kind of modern technical stack, what Hyper does is allows you to abstract the service backend pieces and focus on your application's front end and your application's business rules or logic, which is what really makes your application special. And the reason that we built Hyper, and it's both open source and a cloud offering, and I'll show both, but the main reason that we built Hyper was that we found that product teams were really getting caught into tight deadlines and the need to build very complex apps. Like the complexity of the app has grown in the last 10 years to where there's a lot of moving pieces. But there's a lot of solved problems. There's a lot of solved problems in terms of security and in terms of scalability and reliability. So what we wanted to do is create a abstraction between those services and your code, and the result is that when you're building applications, you're not having to jump into multiple layers of your stack. You're not having to tweak this store procedure in a database or tweak this caching rule, et cetera. You're just kind of working inside your single project and executing your specific business logic or business rules. So just to quickly provide a demo of the cloud project, I've got a blank kind of GitHub repo, and I've spun it up in Gitpod, which is like a little VM with Visual Studio Code on the front end. And what we're going to do is essentially show you how you might get started using cache and do it from scratch. And the idea is that you would already have your app, and you need to add a cache to make a particular piece more performant, or maybe you want to add sessions and give a certain time for each session to stay connected, et cetera. So we'll just start knitting a blank project in NPM, and we'll install Hyper Connect, which is a SDK that just provides nice sugar on top of a REST API. So Hyper Connect, and then we'll install a couple of little utilities, .env, and we'll make this NPM package or module type module. So we can use ESM syntax like import from and all of that. So I'll just edit the package JSON to set the type of this package to module. And I'll do it the old-fashioned way. So type module, that'll give us our ESM syntax. And then we'll just create a .env file and an index.js file. So the .env file is where we would put our hyper connection string, and we're going to go and get that. And we can go and get that by signing up for a free developer account on dashboard.hyper.io. So we can just hit the GitHub button, and if it's your first time, it'll just ask you for your email address, and then you sign up and you have a free account. Each free account comes with 3 hyper applications that you can use. And essentially an application is just a back-end collection of services. So we'll add a application and we'll call it demo 2. And we'll just choose cache for our service, but we could choose data storage, and we could add queues or add search, but we're just going to use cache for now. And again, the main point is with Hyper, you don't have to use all the services. You can mix and match. So you may have an application that's, kind of a React Next.js app, and you're hooking into a Postgres database, but you just need to get a little bit of speed by creating some caching on some pages. Or you may have an app where you're doing some logins, but you want to just add some sessions to time out a user's login, even if you're using, cookies or JWTs. So as this is being spun up, what we want to do is go to our dashboard, and the focus of Hyper is just is simplicity, is to make it simple to use. So once you have your infrastructure, you can open up your app, and you can just copy this connection string, and this connection string gives you everything you need to connect to a Hyper service. So we just copy that connection string, and we go in our environment variable, and we paste that connection string in, and now we are ready to connect to our Hyper service and start coding. And what we'll do is, the first thing we'll do is import HyperConnect from our HyperConnect module that we installed. And then we're going to set up a Hyper connection by just calling connect, and we're going to pass in that environment string. Okay, so now we've got a Hyper instance, and we have a cache service on the back end, and we can look at our cache and see it's almost set up. And what we'll do is go ahead and go through kind of the cache commands. So there's add, which adds a document to the cache. There's get, which gets a document from the cache. There's set, which updates a document, and there's remove. And then finally, query. And what we'll do is just kind of go through each one of these. They're pretty straightforward. The first one is add, so we'll do await. And every API in Hyper is promise-based and composable. So you can kind of compose cache and search and other services together through a pipeline. So we'll just do add key 1. And so if you've worked with caches before, not all of them kind of support JSON data. so what we did with HyperCache is, since the majority of our use cases is storing JSON data and pulling JSON data, so we in the abstraction had that directly be supported. So we can just add a JSON object here. Let's do world. And then the other thing we can do for add is we can give it a TTL. And this is optional, but we can just say, you know what, we want this to be in the cache for 1 minute or 1 hour or 1 day or whatever. And, or we could leave it blank and it would be in there permanently. So that's the add. And then the get is just await hyper.cache.get and then the key. So I'm going to run this, and I'm going to include the .env config requirement so that it'll pull in the environment variable, and then just type index.js. And if all works, we should get hello world. So basically, we added a document to the cache, and we got it out. Now, you may want to verify that on the back end. So we introduced a tool called Vision. And Vision is kind of a data or service explorer, if you will, and it allows you to look at any Hyper service and kind of sneak in to see what's going on. So I can take my connection string and just go into Vision and paste that there. And then apply filter. So we don't have a data service, we just have a cache service. And you can see there's my key, and you can see my value is in there. So just like that, I'm caching data. Pretty easy to do and hopefully straightforward. Why do I want to cache data? I may want to store sessions as users log in, or I may want to create aggregate data so that when someone pulls up a dashboard, they're not querying the database to get a count of XYZ items. I can just query the cache that's kind of still while valid pattern, and gets updated, every 2 minutes or every 5 minutes. And then if a lot of people go to view your dashboard, you're not firing off a lot of queries on your database, slowing it down. So to set a value on the cache, it's just basically the same as add. You just do await hyper.cache set and give it your key name, and then change your document, and we'll just run that. Okay. And there we go. We've updated it. We can verify it with Vision. Let's refresh data, and then we should have hello Krumware. Pretty cool. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy, right? So a more complicated example is, let's say you wanted a fast way to pull up a bunch of results, and you, for whatever reason, you did not have the way your data was structured, the ability to create a secondary index in your data store. So with caching, you can actually create a, kind of a secondary index on any data. So if, and again, this is a lousy example, but, in the honor of Georgia winning the national championship, I'm going to choose the red and black for my colors. Go Dogs. We got to take them when we can get them, right? And enjoy every minute of it. But we'll just add some colors. And I'm just, creating a -1, -2, whatever. But let's say you had some data and, you add a key, and you can add that key and put dashes on it to kind of separate values. And then when you query, you can do kind of a pattern match. So if you want to get all the colors in your cache, you just do hypercache query, and then you just say color and then star. If you wanted to get everything that ends with 1, you would do *1. So you just use this star to pattern match all your keys. And with that, it should return a result. And on that result, it'll have a docs attribute. So if we save that, we should get a list of our colors here. And there we go. So that's really pretty much it for cache. It's a short API and it's simple, but the thing is you can leverage this cache to just add complete little optimizations to your app to make things faster without having to go crazy in your back-end infrastructure. And that's kind of how Hyper services are built. Same thing with search. If you need to add a search engine, you get a simple API, you spin up a search engine, load it full of data, and you start using it. And then when you need to use something different, it's very easy to switch because you're creating a context boundary between the implementation details of your service and the implementation details of your app. And when you do that, you create a loosely coupled experience, which means that your app is focused on what makes it special, and the infrastructure can do what it does best, right? So with that, I'll just talk a little bit about open source and Hyper Core. So Hyper is built using and is open source. And again, we use an architecture called the ports and adapters architecture, which basically means we define a specification like cache, and then we allow for any kind of adapter to be implemented on that specification. So, but from the application user experience, they don't have to care. They don't have to care, for example, if the cache is DynamoDB, Redis, or Memcache or whatever, they know that they get that API and they get scale from that. And then we have HyperConnect currently available in Node, but also shortly in the next few weeks will be available in Python as well, which just makes it intuitive to connect to these services. So under the hood, ports and adapters pattern, you have HyperConnect, and then you have APIs. So HyperConnect is kind of the SDK, if you will, and then you have the APIs. And we have REST. We also have a proof of concept in GraphQL, and we're debating whether to do an API in gRPC. But the point is because the architecture, we can define those interfaces and just those interfaces without having to rewrite the core, rewrite the ports, rewrite the adapters. So you get a full modular architecture, which really works well with cloud-native applications when you want to be able to change things based on what changes with your app. The core really just provides internal messaging. That's all it does so that they can communicate together. And you can hook in and export things like logging and tracing, et cetera. A port and adapter. A port is just a specification that says if you want to use this cache API, if you want your cache infrastructure to use it, it needs to implement these methods and these inputs. And right now we have 5 ports: data, cache, search, storage, and queue. And again, I just want to re-emphasize that when you use Hyper, you don't have to use all 5 of these ports. You can just mix and match what you need. And if you want to use all 5, you're starting from scratch, then that could be a huge efficiency in terms of saving time to get an infrastructure spun up. And then adapters. So we have several implementations of adapters and constantly looking at implementing more. Again, we've had open source people contribute adapters for their needs, and we've got many available. But basically, the adapter is the implementation of the specification connected to a resource, whether that's MongoDB or Redis or ZeroMQ, whatever. So locality of behavior, it's really focused around ease of maintenance. And the concept of locality of behavior, if all of your business logic is in your application tier and your presentation tier is just focused on how to take that business logic and present it, and your services tier is just focused on how to persist and retrieve information, then you have this concept of locality of behavior where any change that comes up is 90% of the time in one spot. So you're not having to go through several different repositories or several different files just to implement a change, which really I think for me as a developer makes me happy when I get a change request and I don't have to make changes to the database or changes to the front end. I can just implement the change in the business rule. So if you want to get started with the OSS, I don't like saying that, Hyper OSS version, it's all on GitHub and it's built using Dino. And basically, we're huge fans of Dino, where it's going in terms of web standards and moving, kind of back in JavaScript / TypeScript code into the world of web standards. I think it's helping drive some of Node's changes, like by default with Dino, you get the fetch API built in, you get local storage built in, you get all kinds of interesting things. So we really like Dino, and it's pretty easy to use, especially if you've fought in past few months the kind of the CJS ESM pain. You just don't have that pain in Dino. It's not there. Everything is ESM. So I did the demo, and yeah, the summary, we're really trying to make things easier for developers and startups to build high quality software and build quality into your product instead of kind of creating this prototype that works, but then as soon as you get scale, it kind of falls apart. We want to kind of prevent that kind of common pattern. And let's go to our website. So a great place to get started is just to go to Hyper.io, and there's a get started video that kind of walks you through using storage. And storage is a really fun one. If you've ever worked with things like GCP, file storage, or S3, there's a lot of things you've got to do just to get a bucket set up or a storage point set up. With Hyper, it literally is just spin up storage, get your app key, upload a file, download a file. It's pretty nice and can save a lot of time while doing the right thing. So here you can kind of see examples of each one of our services, code examples on the website. So you can see our cache service here, and search is really cool. So you have the ability to load multiple documents in one batch, and then you can match on particular fields or use filters to break up your search index. And then, like I said, storage, it's upload, file name, stream, download, file name. And so the interesting thing when using tools like S3 or GCP, in order to support large amounts of data, they don't tell you this, but you have to use pre-signed URLs. Has anyone got experience using pre-signed URLs? So, and they don't tell you that wrinkle, right? You know, what we did was we implemented that, and so all you have to do is call upload, and it basically takes care of all of that kind of handshake, to request handshake to deal with that. And then same thing with download. So that's kind of cool. And the last piece, so if you guys are React fans, we've got a blog post called Introducing the Alternative Stack. And this framework, Remix, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of a new React framework that really embraces web standards. And we implemented a stack so you can kind of, you know, build a Remix app and connect Hyper and kind of see how a real world app kind of works with Hyper. It has authentication, and it just allows you to add notes and remove notes or whatever. So it's a basic CRUD app, but it does give you an idea of how it might work in kind of a React environment. And our core architect, Tyler, did a great job putting this together. We're also building another one for Next.js that should be coming out in the next couple of weeks. So I would encourage you, but I'd definitely encourage you to check out Remix if you haven't. It's, again, very much like as far as what it does, is very much like Next.js and for React, but again, it kind of focuses on web standards and kind of provides an abstraction so you don't have to really deal with that boundary between your browser code and your server code. You have a really nice abstraction that connects those two together. More marketing stuff. So thank you. I'll be glad to take questions.
Yeah. You won't be able to hear, I don't think you'll be able to hear us on the stream, so you might have to repeat.
Okay. Yeah, I'll repeat them.
Let me see if I don't have anything on the live chat. So for handling, one of the cases that we see a lot is like multi-organizational applications.
Mm-hmm.
And controlling who sees what data in those live applications. Are there some tools that are built in to give us some abstraction around that? Or is that where we write maybe custom Hyper stuff?
Yeah, so the cloud version supports teams. So you could have multiple teams and organize your teams that way. And then for each connection, one of the things for our version 1 right now, it's currently in beta, and it's good and stable, and we just want as many people to use it as possible. But these keys in the version 1 will have scopes. So you'll be able to apply scopes and say, this is read only. And then you can give that key to that team. And this scope is read write, you give that key to that team. So you can separate that. And you can also, within the services, you can build multiple services within an app. So you could have multiple search engines, multiple queues, things like that. And then I believe you'll be able to add permissions on that as well. Any other questions?
Joe, I know you had some questions.
I don't
So you covered a little bit of the when would I use Hyper, right?
Yeah, like when, that's, like, I guess kind of, not really.
Yeah, not really.
Yeah, I don't really have a specific question, I guess. I'm just kind of curious, what is under the hood? What are you kind of like, what are you abstracting on top of, like, what cloud provider, and like, just kind of curious on that.
Yeah, so we're completely designed to be agnostic. So the question is, what cloud provider is HyperCloud running on right now? And Hyper is designed to be cloud agnostic. Right now, we have implemented the beta version on Amazon, and it's using all open source scalable technology. So everything is built to auto scale in a multi-tenant environment on demand. So if you guys log in and spin up applications on the dashboard, our whole environment will scale to manage that. And our next phase, probably around version 1.5, is to move to a full cloud native infrastructure, and then you would be able to run your backend on any cloud. Now, with the open source version, you can do that now. You would just have to, pull out your own Terraform and your own Kubernetes tools. And people have expressed interest in doing that. So this could act as kind of a self-service portal for operation teams if they want to, just give development teams a way to spin up infrastructure without bothering them, and they can focus on making that infrastructure great.
So today, is your scalable infrastructure Kubernetes today, and it's just not exposed, or is that Lambda?
Right now it's running on ECS for the core of Hyper, and kind of the back end services are all in scalable clusters that have kind of AWS auto scaling rules. We haven't dug into the best practice of running services on Kubernetes, but the core is Kubernetes ready. It's just running on ECS.
Got it. So is there a deployment option for Docker today?
Yes.
So it's all container?
Yeah, so there's kind of three options, and what's pretty cool is there's actually an executable built on the Hyper open source version, where you can download that executable and run everything locally. Let's see if I can go to releases. We call it Nano, Hyper Nano, but you can actually download that, and it runs as self-contained exe, and it will spin up essentially local versions of the adapters for all the services. And then you can do another step and say you can run it in a Docker container and hook up with Docker Compose and run all your services in Docker containers. And then you can obviously do the same thing with Kubernetes and Helm charts, but we just don't have the scripts for that. We have a Docker Compose example, but we don't have scripts for Kubernetes yet.
What's the future of the kind of the Hyper Cloud dashboard, and what Hyper Cloud is responsible for with regards to third-party services? Like, so would you be able to orchestrate RDS, or spin up a database from here, or I guess you have to add third-party API keys,
Right.
but is it going to stay focused on the Hyper core, or will you be able to actually orchestrate other infrastructure?
Yeah, so we have the capability to provide into the dashboard the ability to kind of choose. So you say data and choose your data source from, you know, cloud to actual, you know, implementation, right? So you could, you know, say, I want to run on AWS and I want to use Postgres RDS. Or you could say, I want to run on Google and use Google's, you know, document store. So we have the groundwork or the framework in the OS core module to do that. It's just a question of really how wanted is that, right? Is it worth the, you know, kind of the implementation of bringing it to a front end so you can click that, you know, and because, you know, one of the pain points that we found that I found in my history with enterprise is just how easy, if you really don't pay attention to context boundaries, how easy it is to get tightly coupled to an infrastructure. And if someone, you know, for a company or enterprise decides, you know what, we want to move to Microsoft Azure. Well, that can become an incredibly complex problem if you've got like tight coupledness into, you know, things like S3 or EC2 or DynamoDB. So one of the potential use cases for Hyper is to be able to make that relatively or much easier than if you are taking a legacy stack and trying to port it from one infrastructure to another. Yes, sir.
What are some of the features you're planning to add to the cache?
What are some of the features we are planning to add to the cache? So right now, we are pretty happy with it, but we have a way to extend modules with our HyperConnect, and we've written, you know, extensions to, let me see if I can't pull it up, to basically allow you to, let me go, to allow you to add even more abstractions on top of Hyper services. For example, we've got a counter extension, that essentially turns the cache into just an increment counter so that it abstracts HyperConnect and then basically adds counter.increment, counter.decrement, counter.get.reset. So you could have, you know, let's say you have 10 metrics on a dashboard, you could just use this Hyper counter to increment them every time something was added, and then you can get them very quickly using a query. But open for suggestions. If you see a needed feature in the cache that's not there, happy to talk about it. One of the other focal points is Hyper is kind of focused on this 80% solution model. So we want to provide, you know, 80%, and if you need to get off of that 80% and you've got a special case, we want to give you a ability to move to that special case. But we're not trying to be the end-all be-all of everything. We want to give like the best practices to developers that want to step on the gas and go.
What about some nice like lifecycle tooling or debugging?
Yep.
What do we have around debugging?
So we're V1 on the roadmap. You'll have full logging support and the ability to see some, you know, some metrics on how many writes, how many reads, et cetera. So that's on the version 1. So the question was around logging and performance monitoring, things like that. And that's on the list to go. That's why we're in beta. Basically, we want to make sure we implement those tools before we go version 1.
From a debugging standpoint, is there a chance that something may go wrong in hypercloud and I need to get visibility into that? And is there a way to do that?
Yeah, so from a debugging standpoint, getting access into hypercloud with the logging, you would be able to see that, and then you have an extension on HyperConnect where you can actually log at the SDK level, so you can see that. And then we have the vision tool that should give you information, as well as we have, the standard, uptime monitoring tools that you have access to, and you could get notified if there was downtime.
Let's see. Did we go through pricing?
No, we can pop over to pricing. So we've got a free developer account, and you get 3 Hyper applications. And we're talking about, so you can start with the free one, and if you're just using cache and you exceed the limits of the cache standards for free, it's just a small fee to go past that. So you don't have to go to Pro, you can still just grow. And then Pro is mainly for teams, so startups, and you get up to 10 applications with 5 users, and you obviously get more capacity and logging and email support. And then we have business, which is really geared towards agencies or teams of teams. Like if you're managing 10 product teams, you may want a business tier to give each one of those teams the ability to essentially spin up their own infrastructure.
Multi-organization.
Yep.
And just to clarify, 5 users would be 5 administrative users.
Correct. 5 users to the dashboard. Yep.
Got it. From what about for auth? Could you cover auth?
Yeah. So Hyper and authentication. We've talked about that a lot, and one of the things there's a lot of great authentication services that just focus on authentication, like Auth0 or Okta, Cognito in AWS. So we definitely don't want to reinvent the wheel, and we definitely don't want to be the experts of authentication. With that said, we actually provide a lot of videos online showing how to implement authentication with best practices. And one of our most popular ones is Svelte, and doing authentication with that. And what we found about authentication is everyone's different, everyone has different needs, as well as the best practices seem to move every 3 months to 6 months. So we don't kind of see that as a general purpose kind of service, because you would need so much configuration to fit your particular thing. So we're kind of like, we're happy to work with you. We have cache, which can handle sessions. We have the ability to provide permissions and scopes, but the authentication, again, our stance is if we pick one, we're going to pick wrong for somebody, right? And the question is you can pull up a handful of great open source projects for free, like Passport.js and others that would be just as good as what we put together.
Joe, did you want to ask your question a different way? Or were you curious about how Hyper interacts with the infrastructure providers? Or
Yeah, you were saying that the problem that you were having was, like, let's say you have a legacy like architecture that a stack that's using whether it's hybrid or
Right.
From Azure, and they want to do that and integrating that. So is there like a solution, I guess, to say, like, let's say like this AI service in Azure wants to get images from S3, let's say, like, is there like a solution sort of that you would say, since this is like, you know, cloud agnostic, like, would there be like a, you know, way to wrap around that for a solution?
Yeah, so the answer is, let's say you have applications in one cloud and you have data in another cloud, and you want to connect to those. Again, Hyper can serve as a solution there, and has in kind of ETL patterns. So you would you know, stand up a protected API in front of your Hyper service, and your Hyper service would be connected to your storage, and then that protected API would be, the authentication would be provided to your application in Azure. And then all that does is gives you a loosely coupled boundary, so that, let's say, for whatever reason, at some point you want that storage to move from S3 to Azure, right? You can operate in a parallel kind of migration. So the main app is pulling from S3, and then as you start to move that data to the bucket in Azure, and then when all that data is moved over, then you just change your Hyper target from S3 to Azure, and now you don't have to change code in your application, and if done right, you have zero downtime, right? And you're just changing an API key from one target to another. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So on your self-hosted side, and also relating to your pricing, we see a lot of companies decide that self-hosted means enterprise. But we do see a lot of people that are, we see more and more people that are self-hosting. And that's always an opinion or an argument that we talk about when, you know, what's your strategy for pricing a SaaS product or a hybrid SaaS product? But do you have any thoughts on how to price self-hosting?
Yeah, so how to price self-hosting, really what our kind of focus is, you know, we want Hyper to do all the, you know, what machines are good at, all the heavy lifting, right? So if you want to self-host, we're happy to work with you and provide essentially support services in some sort of agreement to make sure that you have someone to call, even though you're using it on your own infrastructure, to support you for Hyper. We don't really see much of anything else for that, but we want to make sure that you're running current software and make sure that you have what we promise: scalability, reliability, and resiliency. And the last use case that comes up that I would like to just mention is, so a lot of times people say, well, Hyper would be great if I'm building a new app, but actually one of the sweet spots I think Hyper is really good at is, let's say you have a legacy application, but you have users that want features, and they're kind of discoverable features, right? They don't know exactly what they want. If it's a web-based platform, you could actually use Hyper as an innovation tool and spin up, you know, side apps or sister apps that work with your legacy app and allow you to iterate on features, getting full discovery. And then when they get, you know, kind of nailed down, then you can actually incur the expense of adding it into your large flagship product, or use, you know, architectures that allow multiple front-end interfaces within the same app too. Yeah. But it does give you, you know, a lot of times features that are good ideas get kind of pushed aside because the amount of plumbing required to implement it is like 6 weeks. Well, we don't have time for 6 weeks, but if you could spin up a page and store data in a day and test to see if this is valid with real users, then you might be able to get more traction into those kinds of implementations.
So this is potentially a legitimate application migration strategy.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think that's really important. A lot of companies are figuring out ways to migrate their infrastructure too. I
Yeah.
think that's cool.
Yeah, and you can use, like the strangler pattern and other patterns to, manage that migration process in a sane way, right? Because it does take time to move over, and but yes, you can leverage this for proof of concepts, iteration on ideas, and migration strategies.
I think it's awesome.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I hope you learned something. Please give Hyper a try, and if you think of cool use cases for cache or search or any of those things, we're all ears. Our purpose is to make developers' lives easy while allowing you to build quality into your applications. So that's what we're passionate about, and we'd love to talk to you.
Yeah, how can they get a hold of you?
You can go to hyper.io and click the Getting Started button and connect us that way. Or you can find me on Twitter at twilson63 or at _hyper_io. It's horrible. Or you can email me at tom@hyper.io. So.
Awesome. Well, thank
Great.
you, Tom.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good job.
Thank you.